one of the questions that we learned to ask is, what is it like on the other side of me? But we had never thought to ask that from the church perspective.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. We are in season 4 of this podcast, and we have been having a blast with every conversation, with every guest. I'm here, as usual, with my good friend, Doug Parks. What's up, Doug?
Hey, Erin. How's it going?
Good to be with... I'm good. Good to be with you. And we also have with us our friend, Holly Gillespie. Holly, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, where you come from?
Well, hi, thanks for having me. I am in Southwest Indiana, and I serve at First Christian Church in an outside town of Evansville, Indiana called Newburgh. I've actually been here on staff for just over 20 years and have been in this executive role for about 10 years.
That is amazing. Some longevity on the podcast today. Love it. Thanks for being with us, Holly. In season 4, we're really trying to get around this idea that as church leaders, we're always preparing for the next push, right? Whether it's fall or it's spring or it's holiday season or whatever it might be, we're always prepping for the next push. And with intentional churches, just a real key feature of what they do is like helping churches think about those who are far from God. Helping churches think about the language they use as the one. And so today we want to have a conversation about a little bit about the journey that your church has been on and how you have really built and designed some of your systems and processes to be oriented towards the one, towards the people that are close to us but far from God. And so, Holly, if you wouldn't mind, maybe let's just start by sharing, as much as you're willing to share, a little bit of the journey that your church has been on over the last several years.
Yeah. So we did our first, what Intentional Churches calls an install, so kind of that first big engagement in November of 21. And when we entered into that space, our current reality, it was pretty bleak. We had some really hard times. Some really great years were behind us. We had encountered some hard times, and our reality was hard. We had turned a corner culturally with our team, and we had been in a great season of rebuilding a lot of health and structures with our team, and we were just primed to enter into this space with intentional churches and learn about something called Church OS. And it has changed the direction and how we approach things and given us a lot of clarity for where we're headed as a team.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Erin, I wanted to say, I'm so excited for our listeners to get to hear from Holly, because she's like a power ninja around like church leadership and like running this thing we call Church OS. So I think it's going to be a fun conversation today.
That is awesome. Well, I want to kind of focus in our conversation really around this idea of, pretty much every church has some sort of connection, or like we use the word engagement pathway, or really process. Holly, I'm curious for you guys, what did your connection or engagement process look like before you really had this idea of thinking about and designing things in the direction of and for the purpose of the one? Would you mind just talking to us about what that looked like before you made any shifts?
We basically just asked people to take leaps. So it was kind of like in Church OS language, we just had this buffet. And come to us, and then we'll like give you either everything, or you tell us what you want, and we'll do our best to kind of match you up. It was very haphazard, and honestly, we just didn't know what we didn't know. The other piece to that is that basically what we were doing had worked for us in a season with incredible church growth. And so all of a sudden, things have gotten bleak. We've hit some hard times, and we just kept doing what we'd always done, not knowing what else to do. We didn't know when we looked under the hood, so to speak, to try to figure out what was going on. We didn't even know what we were looking at under the hood. Like, what were all those parts and pieces we needed to be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. So when you think about what was working and not working, you're saying it just felt a little haphazard, and frankly, you didn't even know where you needed to put your energy and effort to begin designing any sort of engagement for the one.
Right. We didn't even have one language. We were a church mainly, I would say,
Okay.
mainly 99s. I mean, we had a few baptisms. Those baptisms were declining. And we just didn't know what direction to go. So we kept doing what we did. For example, I can remember when I was doing full-time women's ministry. I mean, I had a book of all the studies and that women could engage with. And what was really great about it is I had little symbols next to it that would say, this is for a beginner if you're new to Bible study. This is kind of a medium, and this is an in-depth study. And that was the best guide that I had. I was thinking back, like, what did we do for the one? We had a information card. We now call it a connect card. And in that information card, we wanted to know every single thing about you, like fill out a whole book for us so we can know everything about you the first time. I mean, we didn't realize, like, who wants to really fill all that information out?
Yeah, that is amazing. That's so good. Before we get into how you guys have really started to shift and design your process with the one in mind, Doug, I want to ask you just about this idea of, as we're designing anything, as we're thinking about even the overarching theme of this season of like looking towards whatever our next push, whatever our next emphasis is going to be in our churches, we can get mixed up in this logic of thinking we need to design both for the 99 and for the one, right? And so, Doug, can you help us just talk us through how we get mixed up in that, why it's important that we really differentiate and design towards the one? Just give us some insight on that.
Yeah, Erin. So I think I first want to start back in a little bit of history, because I do believe every church leader is sensing this. All of our listeners are sensing this, but we are in a time of evolution and transition in church. And Holly alluded to it when she talked about, we were just running the same play, basically. We ran in the 90s or the early 2000s. And that worked at a time. The buffet actually worked. The programmatic church strategy, where the more hooks you put in the water, the more fish you'll catch. And if you remember, it's going to date me, I know, but there used to be these things that came in the mail, like the J.C. Penney catalog. Erin, have you ever heard of J.C. Penney?
Whoa!
Do you know what that is?
Once upon a time, yes. I think I've heard of that.
Catalog was organized by categories, and it was subsets, but it was this buffet of products you could buy that were somewhat sequenced, and you had to know how to navigate your way down through that. Well, the programmatic church followed a very similar model, because that's the way choices were being made, decisions were being made, and how you would buy product especially in America, but in general. And so the church was mimicking that. And I think when Holly talks about a lot of churches are still running that same play, that play is still in effect in so many of our churches, where we're not using a word I like to use. This word I'm going to use to answer your question, and that is segmentation. That we're thinking about the segments of people, I'm going to use a more businessy phrase, value proposition. Like, what is it exactly that they would exchange their time, energy, money, maybe, of things of value to go do. So the idea of the buffet is we're just shotgun communicating to all segments, all messages. I think in this evolution of the church, and especially as the internet has taught us all how to shop through a filtered experience, then the church must begin to make the shift that Holly and her team have been making towards segmentation. And the segments you have to think about. We emphasize this idea. We have to design the bulk of our broadcast, very public steps for the one. What we mean by that is those who are showing up in our church who are brand new to Christ, or maybe aren't even following Christ yet. We need to have a crystal clear understanding of that segmentation, what motivates them, what they value. And we believe you should prioritize your steps for those. Now, we'll probably talk about this a little bit later. Other segmentations. Well, then what about all your believers? We use the phrase you're 99. That's a segmentation that you're communicating to, offering options to, and you got to figure out how to do that. And then the weird one, which the programmatic church led us to, and I don't know if you guys can resonate with this at all, but is the church ministry leader segment. And most of our communications and our steps are actually designed not for the one, not for the 99. They're designed with the priority and emphasis of our ministry leader segment inside of our church. Can you guys resonate with that at all? Like,
oh yeah, I'm sure.
And that's where you're talking about some silo stuff starts happening, right, Doug?
oh yeah, definitely silos. So I think when Erin's original question I want to push us back to is, and I want to hear from Holly on this, when you switch your lens and say, I have to communicate and market to all those segments, how am I first going to prioritize and address how we're going to market and communicate to the one, those who don't yet know Christ or just are starting to follow him? And what do they need in their life? That becomes the real trick in church leadership, because so many of us grew up in an era of the buffet or the J.C. Penney catalog. Look it up. If you're young, look it up. J.C. Penney was a thing with a catalog.
Best thing ever, especially at Christmas.
Yes. It reminds me of like the Sky Mall magazine, you know? That's
Yes.
really what I'm thinking of. Yes. Holly, how have you, like with what Doug's talking about, like the segmentation idea, you know, just really targeting specific audiences with specific messages. How are you guys thinking about that these days?
Lots of conversation. And I think that that's key too. We've had to have so many conversations where we're really wrestling this thing out and pulling in our team. We have an incredible team that really together, we are better together, and we've created this together. We each have a different perspective, a different lens. And so looking at the segmentation, what is it that we're going after? And that's what Church OS has helped us with. Within our culture of our team to get to health, one of the questions that we learned to ask is, what is it like on the other side of me? So if I'm in a conversation with a teammate, if I'm in a meeting, what's it like on the other side of me? And I don't know the answer to that unless I ask. But we had never thought to ask that from the church perspective. What's it like on the other side of me on a Sunday morning? What's it like on the other side of what we're offering when they pull in the drive, when they come in the parking lot, when they walk in the building, when they sit in the seat, when they experience check-ins? We didn't have a mindset of what's it like on the other side of us for them. And we didn't even think to go and ask anybody, what was that experience like for you? And so it's almost like a little audit with a simple question. What was that experience like for you? And that was one of the first key steps.
Well, and practically, Holly, this is what I would add. We saw a trend. It's still out there, and I'm not necessarily all the way against it, but this mindset you're talking about generated a kind of business strategy of the secret shopper. You go hire a secret shopper, you have somebody be a secret shopper and come do that assessment of maybe your weekend or your communications. And I don't love that, because at the end of the day, what you're depending upon is someone else's opinion to come in and do that and then give you a prescriptive, like, here's the list of everything I saw that you need to change, which can be, if you're trying to go fast, can be helpful. But part of what we try to do within Church OS is we're teaching mindset. And if our team, like you're talking about, if our team isn't learning how to think like you're saying, like put yourself in the other viewpoint and not yours, then we're not really building alignment and discipline. We're just basically going to the doctor to get a prescription, and we may or may not do a couple of the things they list, but if we do it together and we look at it through someone else's lens, we'll oftentimes own that strategy, that change more, because we're seeing it that way. We're training our mindset.
I can't stress that enough, the concept of mindset, because our action can change. We can execute differently, but if our mindsets don't change, we will always drift back into whatever our mindset really is. And mindset work and mindset shifts that's not slow work. Or that is slow work. That is not fast work. Yes. And so, but that's really where real change happens. And if we want our staffs, our volunteers, even our 99 to be thinking about the one and to be living their lives, in the direction of people that are close to them but far from God, that is going to take time. Holly, I wonder, you talked about a little bit of mindset work that you did. I wonder if there's any other mindsets that you found along the way that had to be shifted as you changed culture, as you really moved in the direction of focusing on the one? Any other mindsets you found that you had to kind of root out and shift in a new direction?
I think the fear that if we think about those who are far from God, that it means that we're leaving those who know Christ behind. So we're not going to be ministering to them. We can't minister to both at the same time. And that has been a hard, and sometimes it's still popping up. Sometimes it can even pop up within me. And I have to ask myself different questions to kind of navigate that really good, we call tension healthy around here because it forces a conversation and we can have a good conversation around it. So navigating that tension when it feels that way, what's the reality? What do we need to pull back and look at? Because we don't have to pull it completely apart. When we are introducing communion on Sunday morning, we can take a moment and explain why we're doing what we're doing for those that are the ones that are coming in that maybe haven't experienced it for a long time. As we do that, it's wonderful for the 99 to hear that remembrance, for that moment, for that why. And it also is equipping them and modeling them for them conversations that they can have. What if they're in a position where someone asks them, well, why do you take communion at your church, when they're talking with their neighbor or a coworker? They've heard it every week in a 1 minute, 30-second type presentation, so to speak. And they can then repeat it because they've heard it every week. And those are the things that were really hard to shift to for us and for our congregation in different moments.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And I think you've hit on a fear many people have. I mean, even in the shifts that we have made at my church, that has been one of the fears is, well, if we're always focused on those that are far from God, we will never have any depth. You know, our people will never have any depth. And I think longtime Christians, we really want to be deep, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I just think we've sometimes forgotten we should be deep and wide. We can't just only be deep. And so you were going to say something, Doug.
Well, I think I would give the listeners and church leaders on this episode, I would just say to you, you got to understand a couple of things that are in play. Number one, in America especially, we've allowed the culture of America to seep into our minds as church leaders, and it's actually not scriptural. And that is, I use this phrase, binary thinking, that everything's either or, and I'm either for or against. Think about how much of our culture is that way, and how much of that mindset has become a part of church people, like Holly's talking about, where we as leaders struggle with are we going to focus on the one to the neglect of the 99? As opposed to, if you go back to scripture, Jesus was way more dynamic. It was not either or. He was focused on the woman at the well, but teaching his disciples and the townspeople all in one motion with one set of words, because he was doing it in a very dynamic and active fashion. He wasn't thinking, I'm going to be for them and against them. He literally was putting into play a dynamic strategy. So I would say we've really got to work. When you're talking about mindset shifts, Erin, and long-term ones, all of us are going to need to, as church leaders, help ourselves and our people to get back to how Jesus did it, which was never to think binary. Like, we're going to do this to the neglect of them. That's like not actually a very scriptural thought.
Yeah, that's good, Doug. I want to turn us back to kind of where we started, which was, we started talking about designing for the next push. I'm assuming many of our listeners are getting ready to think about the next big focus or emphasis in their church. And doing that, thinking and being aware of designing with the one in mind. And so, Holly, you talked about what your kind of connection and engagement strategy looked like before you had experienced some of these mindset shifts. I'm curious, what has changed now as you have really worked on some of this mindset shift? Like, what has changed in terms of how the one or how the ones in your community engage your church?
Yeah, and let me start out by saying it changed initially after our first install in 21, and it changed again with adjustments and tweaks, and we are now taking our next steps in changing and adjusting as we're learning and engaging and learning step by step. And so we think in baby steps, not leaps. what's a comfortable step? So one of the things that our team has actually a concrete piece we've been wrestling out and talking about is we're shifting in our main lobby from a welcome type center to a first steps and a next steps area. And so we've been talking about what's the engagement? How are we moving them there? How do we make that a simple, easy to navigate step? And once they get there, how are we introducing and making their very next step simple? For example, I want to take a next step. I come to the counter and say, I'd like to learn more about volunteering. If the person at the counter says, okay, here's an email where you can go email Holly to find out information, we've just now put it back on them and made it hard. If the person that's at the counter serving them says, that's great, and asks a few engaging questions, very simple questions, and then introduces the follow-up that they'll be receiving, we've now made it we've joined the journey with them, entered into that space, and we're just walking alongside with them with the next little baby step.
That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. Just thinking about how hard are we actually making it for people?
Yeah. And we just had that conversation for like 15, 20 minutes because again, we're still learning all along the way. We simplified our information card is now a simpler connect card. Then we realized we actually left a couple of important things that we need off of it. So, using the tool, we do piloting. We say we pilot, we test things out and see what we learn. We have intentional debriefing on the other side of it. What are we learning with using it so that we can continue to adjust? So our information card went to a simple connect card. We aren't handing out big booklets of here's a small group that you can call a small group leader and get engaged with. We are having relational questions to get to know the person on the other side of this. So in just a moment interaction, they can know that they're seen and heard, and we're just helping them find their next baby step.
Yeah, you know what I'm hearing, Holly? I'm hearing you guys are figuring out there's just something about when we connect people or engage people in the church where we're subconsciously telling them how this church operates. And so many times it's actually building more consumeristic mentality. Like here's either like you're saying, we put a barrier in front of them. We make this a difficult thing to do, or we do it for them instead of trying to empower them and get them to take ownership. It's just, as you're talking, it's just really resonating with me how much subconsciously we either make things really hard for ones, or we baby them so much we make them more consumeristic in nature instead of like making them own their spiritual journey. I don't know, Erin, I want you speak to what I just said, because I know you've been wrestling with a lot of this in leadership. How do we take the monkey off the staff's back as much at the same time making things accessible for the one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's you kind of already hit on it, Doug, and Holly, you've alluded to this too. Like, I'll use the example of the way we engage people in groups. It used to be that we would literally find people for them. And there was no buy-in. There was no, they had to do nothing but show up and sit down and eat dinner. And we were like, surprise, this is your new small group. So now we're going to still make it as easy as possible to say, this is the time that we're going to have this gathering. If you would like to be in a group, you should come join us. There's going to be a bunch of other people there who would like to be in a group. But when you arrive, we're not going to do it for you. You're going to have to take the initiative to go to the place that you most resonate with based on affinity or whatever that might be, and engage in conversation. There's going to be people there to help you, but they're not going to do it for you. And so I think we really have to battle that, even we're going to invite people to participate in basic things like our newcomers class that we call Discover Canyon Ridge or whatever it might be. We are not going to chase people down. Even our newcomers class it's 2 weeks. And we have a pretty good return rate. I would say we have about somewhere between 75 and 80% return rate from week 1 to week 2, which we celebrate. But those people that don't come back for week 2, we send them a follow-up. If they don't re-engage with us, we are not chasing them down. And that was a mindset shift for our staff. We had staff members calling small group leaders 4, 5, 6 times, trying to just get a hold of anybody to help them into the next thing we were doing, or following up with people 4, 5, 6 times. It's like, no, we can make it as easy as possible, and we can't do it for them. We just can't do it for them. We will care as much as they are willing to care and walk with them. So
I hear what so good. This tension, I know it's become famous. Andy Stanley's the tension we're managing of designing for the one, not creating barriers, but at the same time, not giving responsibility, because Erin, I love that you said the buy-in comes. So it's this difficult balance we're trying to reach of making things steps takeable for our ones, but at the same time, I don't know any other way to say it, not emphasizing consumeristic behavior, that we're just like another business that helps you find the product that you want or desire. It's just interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me think about, I remember when I was 12 or 13 and I bought my first pair of shoes that I paid for with my own money. And those shoes lasted way longer than any other shoes my mom had ever bought for me because I had buy-in to those. I was invested. And I think if we just buy the ones shoes always and never have them have any buy-in, like you said, we're just creating consumers. And so I want to shift us just as we kind of end this conversation, because we've talked about this a little bit, where there's some fear maybe in the church that if we design towards the one, we're leaving the 99 behind somehow, or we're not investing or caring about the people that follow Jesus in our churches. And Holly, I'm wondering if you have a story or even just an example of, as your mindsets in your church have shifted to designing towards the one, how have Christians, Jesus followers in your church, how have they been engaged or even more engaged than before, even though your emphasis is on the one?
I would say our inviting culture is increasing. And by that, I mean, whether that is inviting people into our lives to build a relational connection that maybe that they don't know Jesus yet. And so we're having these relational connections with neighbors or coworkers where maybe we were afraid to say anything before. Whether it's that step or it's inviting someone to come serve with me. Maybe they're not on a team yet and they haven't taken that step. And I want to invite them to come serve in elementary with me or come stand at the door and greet with me. What can I invite them into? Because the reality is everybody wants to know they belong somewhere, someplace. And we believe Jesus is the dispenser of hope. We are dispensers of the hope of Jesus. And so when we can invite them to come alongside us, there is power in that. And so that culture of inviting, no matter what it's into, is growing here. Again, it doesn't happen overnight. It's slow. It's person by person. It's our staff and our leadership, and it overflows out. But that real inviting, come alongside, join me in this journey.
Holly, I wonder for our listeners, and for those that are like, man, I really want to work on some of the mindset shift we've talked about today, from buffet style ministry to really segmenting and targeting different groups of people in the way we communicate. What would be the first couple steps you would encourage a church leader to take, or first couple questions you would encourage them to ask as they think about mindset shifts?
I think the first one I would say is, it's got to be really rooted in prayer. Over and over in Scripture, we see where God is saying, Old Testament and New Testament, call to me, seek me, ask, I'm going to answer. And He's so faithful. And so if you're wrestling with this or you don't know where to start or what to do, I think as leaders, we have to start with prayer and go to the one who has all the answers and can guide and direct our steps. And they're going to be good steps. And I think of Jeremiah 29:11, the verses that are after that. So Jeremiah 29:11 is they're in exile and he's talking about, I know the plans I have for you and they're good. But the verses that come right after that, he's talking about, then you're going to call on me. And you're going to come to me and you're going to seek me. And I'm not just going to hear from heaven. I'm going to answer and I'm going to direct your steps. So I think it's starting there. Having a conversation then with your team that's been praying about it. What must we do? What must we do just to move the needle a little bit? And maybe it's auditing one little area. Let's look at what it's like when we come in. What do our signage say? And just start with baby steps. We actually, Church OS talks about defining green. Is it red, yellow, or green? Is it moving kingdom movement forward? Is it moving the Great Commission forward? And so we just took a few things in our different areas and we've said, this is what green looks like. When this interaction or this engagement happens, that's green. And that helped us look for specific things in our interactions and our engagements, whether it is the hosting moment in the service, it's a next steps type experience, it's a guest check-in. This is what green looks like. It's moving people forward. So start with prayer, have a conversation with your team that's been praying over it. There's tools Church OS has, like 4 helpful lists that can help brainstorm and narrow some things down. And then choose one area and just have some questions around it. What does it look like if we have a one mindset for this specific little area, like guest check-ins or a connect card?
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Doug, anything you want to add?
Just a real quick blurb around this practicality question. It's just to maybe help a little bit. First of all, I talked about the segmentation of ministry leader, 99, 1, and all of those need attention. So I don't want it to sound like because we're emphasizing the one, we're just saying we're going to emphasize the one first and make that mindset shift. The second thing that I found helpful for teams when you get into this binary, like, oh, you're all about the one and not about, is what Holly's describing. Just use this phrase. Think about designing, especially around your weekend for the one being there, as having a guest over to your home for dinner. Because when you have a guest over for your home for dinner, all of us have what we call one aware filter. You clean up the piles, you clean the bathroom, you maybe light a candle, because that's probably the only time you light a candle in your house. You put on some music, you still pray, but you preface it. There's a one aware filter. Just think about it that way. And maybe it'll help your team kind of decompress if they get really tense around the idea of designing with the idea of the one, especially around your steps and your weekend, that kind of thing. So
that's great. Well, Holly, thanks for jumping in with us. Fun to connect and chat with you. Doug, as always, thanks for your wisdom and insight you bring to us and to our listeners. Thanks for jumping in with us to the Intentional Churches podcast. We'll see you soon.